Bram Voss had pulled dead things out of the San Pedro before. Cattle, a drowned dog once. He had never pulled out a woman who was still breathing. He almost walked past her. The light was going gold and low over the cottonwoods, and the shape caught against the driftwood looked, at first glance, like a deer carcass snagged in the current. It was the hand that stopped him. A human hand, fingers curled, knuckles white against the wet bark. He waded in without thinking, the way a man does when his body decides faster than his mind. The water came up shockingly cool around his boots, then his knees. Up close, he saw the rest of her. An Apache woman, maybe 30, her wrists lashed together with rawhide cord, her shoulder torn open where the current had dragged her against a broken branch. Blood ran thin and pink into the river, disappearing before he could tell him how much she had lost. He got an arm under her and hauled her up onto the bank. She weighed nothing and everything at once, the way a hurt animal does when you are afraid to hold it too tight or too loose. He cut the cord with his knife, pressed his yellow bandana hard against the wound in her shoulder, and waited for her eyes to open. They did, slowly, full of river water and something worse than fear. She did not ask for help. She did not ask who he was or where she was or how close she had come to dying. Her first words came out cracked, barely more than breath. "Don't take me to town." Then her eyes shifted past his shoulder, toward the road beyond the cottonwoods, as if she expected the town to come riding for her even here. Bram had spent enough years around Fort Bowie to know fear when he heard it, and this was not the fear of a woman afraid of drowning. This was the fear of a woman who had already decided the river was safer than the men waiting on the other side of it. He looked down at the cord he had just cut from her wrists, and something in the knot bothered him before he could say why. Bram turned the cord over in his hand and felt the unease sharpen into certainty. He had tied enough packs and lashed enough gear during his scouting years to recognize the pattern in his sleep. This was not a knot an Apache would tie. It was not the rough, hurried knot of a highway robber either. It was a supply knot, the kind soldiers and scouts used around Fort Bowie to bind loads that needed to hold through a hard ride. Someone wearing a badge, or close enough to one, had tied this woman's wrists. He said nothing about it yet. He wrapped her in his coat and got her breathing steady before he asked her name. "Marina," she told him, and then, after a long pause that told him more than her words did, she said her husband was dead. Not killed in a raid, not lost to sickness. Killed because he had seen something he was not supposed to see. And if men were willing to drown his widow for it, Bram knew whatever he had seen was still alive somewhere in this valley. Her husband had found men out near the Summer Springs on the trail up toward the Chiricahua Mountains, driving false survey stakes into the ground. To most white settlers, those mountains were just heat to escape in July. To her people, the climb was something closer to a lifeline. It meant water when the valley floor turned to dust. It meant hunting grounds, gathering grounds, the old camps where grandmothers had once sat and told stories that were now stories about her. Underneath the torn edge of her dress, tucked against her ribs where the river had not quite managed to take it from her, Marina carried a small piece of buckskin. On it were markings, faded but deliberate, showing where the summer water could be found. It was not a treasure map. It was a memory, passed down the way some families passed down a name. But to Quillen Rusk and the men behind him, it was something else entirely. It was the last piece they needed to know exactly which springs to seize before anyone could stop them. Bram studied her face as she spoke, and a colder thought settled into him. They had not thrown her into that river because she was worthless to them. They had thrown her in because Rusk believed she had already told him everything. He was wrong. That mistake had sent Marina into the river, but it had also delivered Rusk's secret into the hands of the one man in the valley stubborn enough to keep digging. Marina's hand moved instinctively to her ribs, to the buckskin still hidden there. And for the first time since Bram had pulled her from the water, Something other than fear crossed her face. It looked almost like defiance. Russ did not know what he had let slip into the current, and Bram was starting to understand that whatever happened next, this woman was not finished fighting. If you have followed this far, ask yourself what you would have done in Bram's place, holding that cord and realizing who had tied it. Stay with us a little longer, because this valley had not shown its worst yet. Bram did not take her to Charleston. He never considered it. If Russ got to her before she could speak a full sentence in her own defense, there would be no sentence left to speak. There would only be a rope and a crowd looking for someone to blame. He brought her home instead, to the low ranch house he had built with his own hands and lived in mostly alone. He laid clean cloth over her shoulder, boiled water for the wound, and worked with the same careful, wordless patience he used on a sick horse. Morena watched him the whole time, saying nothing, her eyes tracking his hands the way a person tracks a stranger they have not decided to trust yet. It was the way he moved that gave him away. Efficient. Trained. She asked him flatly if he had been a soldier. Scout, he told her, years back, out of Fort Bowie. Something closed in her face when he said it, and he did not blame her. He told her the rest before she could ask, because a truth offered was worth more than a truth pulled out of him. He told her about the summer he had led a column of soldiers up into the mountains, certain they were tracking a raiding party. What they found instead was a summer camp. Women boiling mesquite beans, children, old men who could barely stand. He did not describe what happened next, and he did not need to. The silence did that work for him. He said only that he had quit scouting not long after, bought this stretch of dry grass and river frontage, and had been trying to live small and quiet ever since. Morena studied him for a long moment. Then she told him her own truth in return. Her husband had not died fighting. He had died because he knew too much. Rusk had paid men to dress and ride like Apache raiders, striking small ranches near the water, so the blame would fall on her people and on the poor settlers alike, clearing both of them off the land in one motion. Her husband had seen it happen once from a ridge above a burning barn, and that knowledge had cost him his life. Neither of them said much after that. Bram stood, crossed the room, and set his revolver down on the table between them. He turned the grip toward her hand, not his own. She looked at the gun. She looked at him. "You were a bad man," she said. It was not quite a question. "Some days I still am," he answered. She did not reach for the revolver. That, more than anything he had said, told him where they stood now. It was the first quiet peace either of them had been given that day, and it lasted less than a minute. Outside, the light had gone the deep blue of full night, and somewhere far off, faint enough that neither of them trusted their own ears at first, came the sound of horses. More than one, moving with purpose and moving toward the house. The horses stopped 100 yards out, and then came the voice, pitched loud enough to carry over the porch rail. Bram Voss. "Open your door. We know what you're hiding in there." Bram stepped out slow, deliberately unsteady on his feet, a half-empty bottle hanging loose from one hand, though he had not touched a drop of it. Quillen Rusk sat his horse at the head of 5 armed men, black hat pushed back, badge catching the last gray light. He held up a folded paper and did not bother getting down. "That Apache woman killed a man in Charleston," Rusk called out. "Got a warrant right here. Hand her over, and nobody needs to get hurt tonight." Bram squinted at the paper like a man who had trouble reading it sober, let alone drunk. He noticed what Rusk was hoping he would not. No county seal, no judge's mark, just ink and a signature that meant nothing outside of Rusk's own hand. If Bram called the lie out too soon, Rusk would start shooting. If he waited too long, Morena would be dragged out under a law that did not exist. He drawled something about needing his spectacles, buying time, playing slower and softer than he felt. It almost worked. Then one of the riders drifted toward the barn, pushed open the door and came out holding a torn strip of wet cloth from Morena's dress. The night broke apart at once. A man lunged for Bram, and Bram let his size do what his speed could not. He drove his shoulder into the rider's chest and slammed him back into the corral post, hard enough to hear the wrist crack against the wood. Behind him, Morena was already moving. She had not stayed inside waiting to be rescued. She cut the tie ropes at the hitching rail with a kitchen knife, sent the posse's spare horses scattering into the dark, and swung a fence rail into the side of another man's head before he even saw her coming. It was not clean fighting. It was desperate and ugly, the kind of fighting that happens in the mud between a corral and a barn wall. But it worked because of what each of them brought to it. Bram was heavy and stubborn, absorbing blows that would have folded a smaller man. Morena was fast and clear-headed, using the dark and the confusion the way someone raised to survive on this land knew how to use it. For a moment, it looked like it might be enough. Then Rusk's pistol caught the last of the moonlight, and the shot that followed tore across Bram's shoulder, spinning him half around and dropping him to one knee in the dirt. Before Bram could rise, two riders had Morena by both arms, dragging her back toward the horses, despite the way she twisted and fought against them. Rusk finally swung down from his saddle then, walking close enough for Bram to see his face clearly for the first time that night. Whatever badge he wore, whatever warrant he carried, there was nothing lawful left in his eyes. "I don't need her dead," Rusk said quietly, almost gently, as if that made it worse instead of better. "I just need her to show me where the last spring is marked on that hide of hers." He gave Bram one last look, saw the blood spreading across his shirt, and smiled like a man already counting him dead. He turned, mounted, and rode off into the dark with Morena bound across his saddle, his men falling in behind him toward the dry wash that climbed east toward the Chiricahua country. Bram knelt in the dirt of his own yard, blood soaking through his shirt, watching the dust of their horses disappear toward the mountains. He had let her go once already, into a river that nearly killed her. He was not about to let a man like Rusk finish what that river had started. But every minute he spent bleeding in that yard gave Rusk another mile, and every mile carried Morena closer to a place where no honest witness would ever find her. Bram did not go into town for help. There was no time and less trust to spare. He rode instead for the small forge at the edge of the valley, where an old blacksmith named Orland Pike had spent years quietly suspicious of Rusk and the paperwork behind every claim filed near the water. Orland did not ask many questions. He grabbed his rifle, saddled his mule, and rode out beside Bram toward the dry wash that climbed east toward the Chiricahua country, because he understood something Bram already knew. A wounded rancher and a frightened widow's word would mean nothing in Charleston. A witness might. They found the posse near a stand of cottonwoods where the creek had shrunk under the summer heat, more mud than water. Rusk stood over Morena as she knelt at the base of the largest tree, forcing her hands into the dirt, demanding she dig for the last marking hidden somewhere beneath the roots. Bram did not charge in. He did something quieter and meaner. He circled wide, found the small herd of cattle grazing loose along a ridge, and drove them hard down into the wash. Hooves and dust and bawling animals broke the night apart before a single shot was fired. Horses reared and scattered. Men who had been steady a moment before were suddenly fighting just to stay in the saddle. In the chaos, Morena dragged the rope one last time against the sharp root she had been working since Rusk forced her to kneel. The fibers snapped, and her hands came free. Orland fired once into the air, a warning shot that told every man there this was no longer a fight they could win quietly. And Bram walked straight through the panic toward the one man he had come for. He had spent years trying not to become the kind of man who solved everything with his fists. But Rusk had chosen a place where words were already buried in the mud. Rusk was younger, faster, and far too confident in it. He landed two hard blows before Bram managed to close the distance, But confidence has never once outlasted stubbornness in a fight, and Bram was nothing if not stubborn. He took the punishment, absorbed it the way he absorbed everything, and drove Russ down into the shallow mud of the creek bed, pinning him there with the full, unglamorous weight of a man who had nothing left to prove and everything left to protect. It did not take long after that. One of Rusk's men, pinned under his own frightened horse and staring at Orland's rifle, broke first. He named the false claims. He named the paid riders. He named the killing of Marina's husband to bury what he had seen. After that, Rusk had nowhere clean left to hide. Every piece of it came out into the open air, right there in the mud, with a witness who was not Apache and not Bram standing close enough to hear it all. Rusk was taken alive, but the rancher who had paid for all of it, the man whose name never had to appear on a single forged paper, was already gone. Word came later that he had slipped west toward Tucson before sunrise, taking with him the real documents and a list of names of anyone who might still talk. If this story has held you this long, think of someone in your own life who carried a weight like Bram's without ever asking for thanks. If stories like this are worth your time, consider joining us here, because the men and women history forgot still deserve to be remembered with dignity. Marina stayed at the ranch a few days more, long enough for her shoulder to start closing and her strength to return. She washed the yellow bandana herself, working the bloodstains out slowly in the basin water, then tied it back around Bram's neck with her own hands, because it had carried both their blood by then, and neither of them saw a reason to throw it away. Bram never told her he loved her. She never said it either. But when he finally asked her, quiet, almost afraid of the answer, whether she would leave once the mountains cooled again, she looked out toward the Chiricahuas for a long moment before she spoke. "Maybe," she said, "but not before I know this valley won't kill another widow." Far off on the horizon, past the last low hills, a thin line of dust was already rising from the direction of Tucson. Rusk had only ever been the knife. The hand that held it was still coming. That Arizona noon sticks with me. The girl coming down from the heat, saying soldiers had blocked the trail up into the Chiricahuas. Some men would hear that and think they lost a campsite. I don't. Those mountains were not a picnic ground. The Chiricahua Apache lived by moving with the seasons, warmer plains in winter, cooler mountains in summer, following water, game, plants, and the old ways that kept families alive. NPS says they were a nomadic people who lived off the land. EHRAF puts it plainer. Summer high, winter low, because the land itself told them when to move. So when a soldier or a land-hungry coward closed that mountain road, he was not just moving people off property. He was cutting a lifeline. He was stealing July's shade from children, meat from hunters, roots from women, and memories from the dead. Funny how powerful men always call that order. I'll tell you what I think. A man who blocks another family from the place that keeps them alive had better not pretend he is serving justice. That ain't law. That is theft standing in uniform. If that girl ran into your yard, would you open the gate or look away?